Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. So, about the issue of buy now, pay later providers, which is a topic that a lot of people are talking about these days. And after a few conversations with friends about it, what I realized is that really before getting into the issue of buy now, pay later, wading through the weeds of a somewhat complicated topic, debating of whether it's a credit transaction or an asset sale or the intermediation of an asset sale or a loan or whatever it might be, we need to set the tone for the conversation. And that means that we do a quick review of sales transactions and loan transactions and the rules that we need to remember when talking about third parties that intermediate either a sale or a loan. So, what are the rules for sales under Islamic law? Well, under Islamic law, sales are generally permissible as long as the primary elements of a valid sale are present. What are those primary elements? They are an offer, an acceptance, the presence of a buyer, the presence of a seller, and an object of sale. Object of sale has to exist at the time of sale. It should be possible to own it privately, and it should be deliverable to the buyer. There should be no uncertainty about the object that's in question, the price that someone's paying for it, and the terms of sale. And the sale as well shouldn't involve any prohibited items. So, if a sale includes both permissible and impermissible components, then the majority view is that the entire sale is void. The buyer and the seller have the responsibility to ensure that lawful possession of goods and lawful possession of money are there from the beginning. They also have the responsibility to deal with each other justly, not exploit or deceive each other. And ownership is transferred by the creation of the contract. So when we talk about permissible and impermissible components, what I said before, what are we talking about? Meaning that I can't go and sell you a bottle of wine as a Muslim because it is impermissible for me to own a bottle of wine. I can't even own a bottle of wine because it's haram for me. So even if I have it, it's not mine because it's not considered wealth. It's not it's not something that can be taken and considered valuable by a Muslim. So if I go and sell that, I'm by default selling something which is impermissible and invalid for me to buy and sell. When does a person actually own something? Well, if it's permissible, then ownership is created by the creation of the contract. Even if there are negotiated variables like delivery or payment at a later time, that doesn't change the basic rule that when you sign the dotted line, you take ownership of that thing. There's some details that go into that, but that's the general rule. Now, those adjustable variables about delivery and payment and all of that, we can, talk about that at another time, along with some of the exemptions to the rule. Now, what are some examples of valid and invalid sales? Let's look at two examples based upon what we just said. Example number one is a valid sale. Let's say a man enters into a clothing store. He expresses interest in buying a specific shirt that's on display. The seller informs him that the shirt is made of this material, it's this size, and it costs this much. The buyer inspects the shirt himself, agrees to the terms, makes payment. The seller takes the shirt down, hands the shirt to the buyer, and in this case, the sale is valid because the shirt exists at the time of sale, it's owned by the seller, it's deliverable to the buyer immediately, the price and the terms of sale are clear and known, and the shirt doesn't contain any prohibited materials. Why is it important to talk about this? Because if we don't set the groundwork for what's allowed, we won't understand where we're going wrong when something is not allowed. What is an example of an invalid sale? Let's give a similar example. A buyer enters a clothing store. He sees a specific shirt on display. The seller informs the buyer about the shirt's material, size, and price. The buyer agrees to the terms and makes payment. The seller goes back to the back, grabs a shirt, puts it in the bag, and hands the shirt to the buyer. When the buyer opens the bag and he inspects the shirt, he finds that it's a different shirt than the one that's on display. So while most of the conditions of sale are in line, there is a problem. That problem is the price of the terms, although they were clear, the specification of the shirt delivered to the customer is different. It's different than the one that's on display. That makes the sale invalid. This gives the customer the ability to return the item and receive either the item they ordered or to get a refund. Okay, so that's a quick example of a valid and an invalid sale. Is it the only reason that a sale could be invalid? No, it is not. But for the sake of our discussion, we're just going to go with one way that a sale would become invalid. Now, what are some of the rules for loans under Islamic law? When we move on to loans, it's important to note that interest-based loans are strictly prohibited under Islamic law. Whether you call it interest or you call it usury, it is impermissible. I loan you $100, you pay me back $110, you agree to that up front, this is impermissible. I loan you $100, you can't pay me back on time, I tack on $10, also impermissible. Any addition on top of a debt agreed to at contract or upon default is considered to be riba. Now, there are three types of contracts under Islamic law. Those are called al-mu'awadat, wat-tawthiqat, wat-tabarru'at. Commutative contracts, mu'awadat, which means they exchange value. Each party is compensated. In our shirt example, I got a shirt, he got money, for example. Then there are documentary contracts. They record rights. Right? I have placed $50 with you as a down payment for the shirt. That's held in trust, and I write a receipt that says I've left that money with you. Now, that receipt is a contract. It records that when I come back to you and I show you that, I can either get my $50 back or I can pay the rest of the money for the shirt. Then there are donative contracts, and those are known as tabarru'at, or sometimes known as uqud al-irfaq. These transfer value without compensation. So that's like I give you a gift of $50, and I write it down. I've given you a gift of $50. That contract now means that that $50 is yours. I'm not expecting anything back from it. Loans, in Arabic known as qard, under Islamic law are donative. They are based on the principle of benevolence, helping others when they're in need. They're not there to allow the lender to profit off of the debtor by stipulating an additional payment or any benefit in return. So even if I said I'll loan you $100 and you'll pay me back $100 and take me out to eat, that meal is riba. Why? Because it was stipulated above and beyond the value of the loan. So any benefit can apply. Most people will do a financial benefit. What this shows is that the time value of money is recognized, as the person who lends money to others is rewarded as if they've donated 50% of the amount, as the Prophet ﷺ had said, "Man aqrada malan marrataini faka'annama tasaddaqa bihi wahida." Whoever loans wealth twice, it's as if he has given it in charity once. Now, as we will discuss later, the time value of money, while recognized, must be tacked onto or appended to the transfer of a good or a service or an asset. We'll talk about that, inshallah ta'ala, in a number or in a couple of installments. Why is there the prohibition of profiting off of loans from the debtor? Why is this something which is not allowed? What Islamic law is trying to achieve, it is trying to preclude any value creation above and beyond real economic activity by preventing charitable acts from becoming a means to extract value from others. So if we take the interest that's earned on a loan as value created without real economic activity, then it becomes clear why Islamic law prohibits these types of transactions. The principle behind the prohibition is to ensure that all value creation is tied to genuine economic activity, such as trade, production, services, where you have skin in the game. There is a balance, an equitable balance in the responsibilities, the liabilities, and the benefit that one gets from that transaction. So in an interest-based loan, the lender receives a return without participating in the borrower's economic activity or bearing any risk associated with the use of the borrowed funds. What this essentially allows the lender to do is extract value from the borrower without contributing to the real economy. Whether the borrower makes money or loses money, the lender's always going to get their share. So Islamic law considers this to be exploitative and unjust, and it leads to a concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, and it creates massive imbalance in society. And I know what you're saying, but I can get a 5%, 6%, 7% loan, and that doesn't harm me as an American. It's part of the financial system. And what you don't realize is that the financial system that you are part and parcel of is not going to make that money off of you primarily. It's going to make it off of the payday loan borrower who is not going to get a loan for 5, 6, 7%. They're going to get a loan for 70%, 80, 90. The highest that I've seen on a payday loan is 400%. And a systemic, in regards to the system or systemic problems with this, is that you might say, oh, I'm part of, the American fabric, and I can get these loans, and this is part of how banking and business is done, and it's not harming me, and it's not harming the company. But you should realize that part of the global financial system means that in order for us to get a 5% interest rate here in the United States, some developing country who we have entered into a long-term lending or business agreement with is being charged 25%. So there's never somebody who's not getting taken advantage of. So there are a number of considerations when we talk about loans other than just not having interest. Number one is the loan agreement should be documented in writing with details such as the loan amount, the repayment terms, and if there is any collateral or guarantees. The lender should not be putting undue pressure on the borrower for repayment, and the borrower has the ethical mandate to make efforts to repay the loan in a timely manner. The borrower also has a responsibility to use the loan for the intended purposes and not for anything that's unlawful or unethical. They should also be repaying the loan in full and on time, and if they have difficulties or there's some kind of financial strain, then they have the obligation to inform the lender of those difficulties, and if they do, and those difficulties are legitimate, then they should be given respite to a later time. فَإِنْ كَانَ ذُو عُسْرَةٍ فَنَظِرَةٌ إِلَى مَيْسَرَةٍ. So if the person is in if the person is in a situation of difficulty, he is given respite to a later time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about a person who cannot pay back a loan. The lender is responsible for allowing them to have that right, but are their rights? Does the right of the borrower go unrestricted? No, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Matlul ghaniyi zulmun yuhillu irdahu wa uqubatuhu." The delay in payment by a solvent person is zulm. It is injustice. It permits his honor and punishment. So you'll be able to essentially call out people for lack of payment and not paying their loans, put social pressure on them, and you'll be able to take them to court and have legal pressure put on them to force them to pay, where they might be wages garnished or property seized or whatever. The lender is responsible for ensuring that the loan is used for a lawful purpose, providing the loan without interest or additional charges, and should be flexible and accommodating if the borrower faces genuine repayment difficulties. And if he doesn't, then, as we said, there can be social or legal pressure that is applied. So, what I want to do right now is ask you to engage in a thought experiment. So, both sales and loans in Islamic law emphasize fairness, transparency, and adherence to the principles of the Sharia. Buyers, sellers, borrowers, lenders, they all have obligations to uphold these standards. So understanding these foundational principles is crucial when discussing the role of third-party intermediaries in either a sale or a loan, such as in the case of buy now, pay later providers. So before we talk about buy now, pay later, then here's a thought experiment for you. If you wanted to become a BNPL provider, how would you intermediate the sale? At what point would you need to become involved? What liabilities would be on you and what responsibilities would you have? Should you or are you willing to assume? Right? What liabilities should you assume or are you willing to assume? What responsibilities should you assume or are you willing to assume? Based on the above rules for sales and loans, is there anything that you should avoid? And so I'll leave that with you to contemplate this brief discussion about sales and loans, and leave it for you to decide whether or not you would want to become a buy now, pay later provider. And inshallah, in the next installment, we'll talk more about the building blocks of transactions and how transactions are categorized. Because what we want to do through these newsletters is not just give you the conclusion. I'm a very, very big proponent. I'm a very big proponent of opening the hood and looking at the engine. Understanding how these things work, I believe, is the best way to educate people on why the values of Islamic finance that we believe are actually substantive and can make a real difference in people's lives and in the systems that they should be informing. And so until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.